Did you know that the second largest reservoir in the United States, Lake Powell, is sitting tonight at about a quarter of its capacity, dropped so low that the drowned canyon underneath it is rising back into daylight after half a century? And the Bureau of Reclamation now warns that Glen Canyon Dam on the Arizona border could fall too low to generate power within months, or that in the single hottest summer ever recorded in Phoenix, more than 600 people in one Arizona county died from the heat, a record, and that when investigators reached the ones who died indoors, most of them had an air conditioner sitting right there in the room, and around 70% of those units were broken. This is Arizona right now, not the postcard, the real thing. A state where the water that built the modern Southwest is running out, the heat is killing people in their own living rooms, and the ground underneath the whole place is still unfinished. So settle in, because we are counting down 25 facts about Arizona that will completely change how you see the Grand Canyon State. And stick around to the very end, because what we saved for last is recent, documented, and genuinely unbearable. Coming in at number 25, the crater and asteroid Doug. In the high desert of Coconino County, about 37 miles east of Flagstaff, there is a hole in the ground 3/4 of a mile across, 560 feet deep, with a rim that stands 148 feet above the plain. It was not made by a volcano or a river. About 50,000 years ago, a lump of iron roughly 150 feet across came in from space and struck the Colorado Plateau with an energy estimated between 15 and 40 megatons. The United States Geological Survey, through the work of geologist Eugene Shoemaker in 1960, confirmed this was an impact crater, the first place on Earth ever proven to be one. It is so clean, so geometrically perfect, that NASA brought the Apollo astronauts here to train for the surface of the moon. I have stood on that rim, and the strange thing is how quiet it is. People pull off the highway, take a photograph, and call it scenery. It is the best preserved record of a catastrophe anywhere on the planet. Fact 24, the bridge that crossed an ocean to get here. In 1968, a chainsaw millionaire named Robert McCulloch was trying to build a city out of nothing on the shore of Lake Havasu, and he needed a reason for anyone to come. So when London put its sinking, century-old bridge up for sale, he bid $2.46 million and won it on April 18, 1968. Here's what almost everyone gets wrong, including, the legend says, McCulloch's own critics. He did not think he was buying the famous Tower Bridge. He knew exactly what he was getting. 10,276 granite blocks were peeled off the structure, numbered, shipped through the Panama Canal, trucked across the desert, and reassembled stone by stone. United States Customs declared it the largest antique ever sold. It was rededicated on October 10, 1971, and to make it span anything at all, they dredged a channel underneath it afterward. London could not hold its own bridge up. Arizona could. Landing at number 23, the cactus you can go to prison for harming. Here is what Hollywood never told you about the saguaro, the giant cactus standing in the background of every Western you have ever seen. That plant is not set, dressing. It grows only in the Sonoran Desert. It lives 150 to 200 years or more. It can reach 40 to 60 feet and weigh over 6 tons. And it does not grow its first arm until it is around 50 to 70 years old. The National Park Service protects whole forests of them at Saguaro National Park, and under the Arizona Native Plant Law, enforced by the State Department of Agriculture, it is a crime to move or destroy one without a permit. The cactus in the cartoon was alive before the cowboys, and it will outlive everyone watching this. At number 22, the cave 2 men hid from the world for 14 years. In November of 1974, 2 cavers named Gary Tenen and Randy Tufts squeezed through a sinkhole at the base of the Whetstone Mountains and found a living wet cave the size of a stadium, full of formations that had been growing drop by drop for hundreds of thousands of years. And then they did something almost nobody would do. They said nothing. For 14 years, they kept its location secret, working quietly with the landowners and the state to protect it. because they knew unregulated crowds would destroy it. Only in 1988 did the story come out, and today, Kartchner Caverns is an Arizona state park, held at 98% humidity to keep it alive, home to a column called Kubla Khan that stands 58 feet tall, the tallest in the state. They found a wonder of the natural world, and the most heroic thing they did was keep their mouths shut. Coming in at number 21, the morning a company deported an entire town on July 12, 1917, in the copper town of Bisbee. The Phelps Dodge Corporation and Cochise County Sheriff Harry Wheeler deputized roughly 2,000 men, rounded up striking miners at gunpoint, and marched them to a baseball field. Then they loaded 1,186 of them into cattle cars, floored with manure, no water, in mid-90s heat, and hauled them 200 miles into the New Mexico desert and abandoned them. A presidential mediation commission, with future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter as its legal counsel, investigated and ruled the deportation, in its words, wholly illegal and without authority in law. About 1/8 of an entire town was kidnapped and exiled before lunch. 21 executives were eventually indicted. Not one of them spent a single night in jail. Fact 20, the mine that only ever pays in corpses. In 1891, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz died in Phoenix, claiming he had found a fortune in gold hidden deep in the Superstition Mountains. People have been looking for it ever since. In 1931, a prospector named Adolph Ruth, a veterinarian with the United States Department of Agriculture, walked into those mountains after it and vanished. Months later, his skull was found nearly a mile from the rest of his body, with 2 holes in it. According to records kept by the Superstition Mountain Lost Dutchman Museum and Arizona State Parks, more than 30 people have died across that 160,000-acre wilderness chasing a mine no one has ever found. A map a dying man scribbled in 1891 has now outlived dozens of the people who tried to follow it. And look, more than 30 people have died walking into those mountains for that gold on the strength of a sketch from a man on his deathbed. Subscribing to this channel asks considerably less of you. It is free, it requires no map, and so far, the survival rate is 100%. Hit the button. The superstitions will still be there at Fact 19. Keep one phrase in mind, though, as we go. The desert here keeps what it takes. Because the last fact in this video is not a legend. It is documented, it is recent, and 19 families live with it right now. Landing at number 19, the 47,000 visitors nobody tells you to see. Every winter, in the Sulphur Springs Valley near Wilcox, something happens that almost no one outside Arizona is ever told to go and witness. Tens of thousands of sandhill cranes, birds with 6-foot wingspans and a fossil record stretching back into the Pleistocene, descend on the wetlands at Whitewater Draw and the Wilcox Playa. The Arizona Game and Fish Department runs an annual count. In a recent record year, they tallied 47,601, with more than 24,000 packed into Whitewater Draw alone. They roost in the shallow water by the thousands, lift off at sunrise together, and the sound carries for miles. One of the great migrations in North America lands in a place most Arizonans could not find on a map. It is happening tonight on a live stream the state runs, while you watch this. At number 18, the volcano field that is not finished. North of Flagstaff sits the San Francisco Volcanic Field. More than 600 volcanic vents spread across the high country, a system that has been quietly migrating eastward for about 6 million years. This is not a dead landscape. In its 2018 National Threat Assessment, the United States Geological Survey rated the field a moderate threat, meaning geologists consider it fully capable of producing a brand new volcano, and the trend line of past eruptions points roughly toward the city. Flagstaff is a town built in the middle of a volcanic field that is still loaded. The last volcano here was born within human memory. The next one already has an address picked out. Coming in at number 17, the gunfight Hollywood got completely wrong. Here is what Hollywood never told you about the most famous shootout in American history. It did not happen at the OK Corral. It happened in a narrow, vacant lot off Fremont Street in Tombstone on October the 26th, 1881, around the corner from the corral entirely. It was not a long, drawn-out duel under a noon sun. It lasted about 30 seconds, roughly 30 shots between the Earps and Doc Holliday on one side and the Clannons and McClorys on the other, and it was over before most of the town knew it had started. Everything you picture about that fight, the location, the stare down, the length of it, is wrong. Arizona just let the movies tell it however they wanted. Fact 16, the town where the mail still comes by mule. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, down an 8-mile trail with no road in or out, sits the village of Supai, capital of the Havasupai Reservation, and the most remote community in the lower 48 states. About 200 people live there, and it is the only place left in the United States where the mail is still carried in and out by mule train, a practice that has run since 1896. The United States Postal Service and the Smithsonian National Postal Museum both document it. Your letter to Supai still rides down a cliff on the back of an animal. There is a working American zip code that the 21st century physically cannot reach, landing at number 15, the canyon that water built and water emptied. Near the town of Page, in the Navajo Sandstone, there is a slot canyon so narrow and so sculpted that it is one of the most photographed places on Earth, Antelope Canyon. In places, it is over 120 feet deep and barely 2 feet wide. And here's the thing people do not understand about it. It was carved entirely by flash flooding, and that same force can arrive in seconds from a storm 15 miles away, while the sky directly overhead is perfectly blue. The National Weather Service has documented exactly how these floods build. The thing that makes that canyon beautiful is the exact thing that makes it a grave. Hold on to that, a single afternoon, a wall of something nobody could outrun, and one survivor. Because the story we end this video on turns on those same three things. At number 14, the Pony Express that never stopped. Supai is not the only place in Arizona where the mail still has a heartbeat. Every year, riders of the Hash Knife Pony Express carry real first-class United States mail on horseback roughly 200 miles, from Holbrook down to the Phoenix area, under official sanction from the Postal Service, billed as the oldest continuously operating Pony Express in the world. Two separate Arizona mail routes still move letters the way they were moved in the 1800s, by hoof. Arizona is the only state where the check being in the mail might genuinely mean it is on a horse. Coming in at number 13, the forest that turned to stone. In the painted Badlands of the Northeast, the National Park Service protects one of the largest concentrations of petrified wood on the planet. These were living trees in the late Triassic, somewhere around 225 million years ago, older than the dinosaurs, that fell, were buried, and slowly turned to solid quartz, cell by cell. You can walk through a forest that died 250 million years ago, and pick up a log that rings like glass, and people still get caught every year trying to slip a piece into a backpack. Fact 12, the battle the history books left out of the war. Here is what nobody taught you in school about the Civil War. Its westernmost battle with fatalities was not fought in the South. It was fought in the Arizona desert at Picacho Peak on April 15, 1862, when a small Union cavalry patrol out of California collided with Confederate scouts in the Mesquite. According to the American Battlefield Trust, the fight lasted over an hour and left 3 Union soldiers dead, including Lieutenant James Barrett, one of the first Union officers killed in the Arizona Territory. The Confederacy wanted a corridor to the Pacific. It died, in part, in a skirmish most Americans have never heard of, beside a peak you can now see from Interstate 10. Landing at number 11, the mountain Arizona forgets it has. Here's what Hollywood never told you about this state. It has alpine tundra. North of Flagstaff, Humphreys Peak rises to 12,633 feet, the highest point in Arizona, the eroded remnant of an old stratovolcano in the San Francisco Peaks, documented by the United States Geological Survey and managed within the Coconino National Forest. There is tundra at the top, There is a downhill ski resort on its slopes. You can sunburn in Phoenix and ski above the clouds in the same state, on the same afternoon, in the place everyone calls a desert. Number 10, the wall you have to win a lottery to see. On the Utah border, inside the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument, there's a formation of Jurassic Navajo sandstone, roughly 190 million years old, frozen into smooth, rolling waves of rock. They call it the Wave. It is so fragile and so coveted that the Bureau of Land Management caps access with a daily permit lottery. Only a handful of people are allowed to set foot on it per day. It took the Earth 190 million years to make. We decided humans could grind it down in a single season if we let them. Coming in at number 9, the dam that built a city most of its own residents have never heard of. On the Salt River sits Theodore Roosevelt Dam, the first major project authorized under the National Reclamation Act of 1902, and, when it was finished, among the largest masonry dams in the world. The United States Bureau of Reclamation built it to store water in a place that had almost none, and in doing so, it made the modern, sprawling, fifth largest city in America possible. Phoenix calls itself a miracle in the desert. It is actually a plumbing decision made in 1911. Fact 8. The cat that came back after 150 years. Here is what Hollywood never told you. Jaguars are not only jungle animals, they belong here. The third largest big cat on Earth once ranged across the American Southwest, and it was hunted and pushed out of the United States roughly 150 years ago. But the Arizona Game and Fish Department and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service have now documented at least 8 individual wild jaguars in the Southwest since 1996, animals with names like El Jefe, Sombra, and Macho B, drifting north out of Sonora, Mexico, into roughly 750,000 acres of designated critical habitat. A new one was confirmed on camera as recently as last year. There is a wild jaguar walking the United States tonight, and it lives in the state everyone swears is too hot for anything. Landing at number 7, the 8 people who ran out of air on Earth. Near the town of Oracle stands a 3-acre world of glass and steel called Biosphere 2. On September 26, 1991, 8 people sealed themselves inside it for 2 years to prove a closed copy of Earth could keep humans alive. It nearly killed them. The oxygen began to fall from nearly 21% down toward 14%, the equivalent of living on a Himalayan peak, until people were exhausted and confused, and the crew had to pump outside air in. Geochemists from Columbia University eventually traced the missing oxygen. The concrete in the building had been quietly absorbing it. The University of Arizona runs the facility now as an earth science laboratory. They built a perfect little Earth. It tried to suffocate them, and then they handed it to scientists trying to save the real one. At number 6, the Dawn Raid Arizona buried. Here is what nobody taught you about this state's territorial history. Before sunrise on April 30th, 1871, a vigilante force from Tucson, a mix of Anglo settlers, Mexican Americans, and Tohono O'odham Dumb allies, attacked a peaceful camp of Aravaipa and Pinal Apache people who had surrendered and were living under the protection of the United States Army. In roughly 30 minutes, they killed around 144 people, almost all of them women and children, and carried off some 24 children to be sold. The attackers were brought to trial in Tucson that December. An all-settler jury acquitted every one of them after deliberating less than half an hour. I have read the accounts of the Camp Grant massacre, and the detail I cannot put down is this: there is no marker at the site. Arizona did not just forget this, it chose to. Coming in at number 5, the lights the governor mocked, then admitted he saw. On the night of March 13th, 1997, thousands of people across Arizona, Nevada, and northern Mexico reported a silent, enormous V-shaped formation gliding low across the sky. The governor, at the time, Fife Symington, held a press conference and made a joke of it, parading an aide out in an alien costume. Years later, he reversed himself completely, saying he had personally watched the craft that night and that it was, in his words, otherworldly. The United States Air Force attributed the later set of lights, the ones at around 10 that night, to illumination flares dropped by A-10 aircraft over the Barry M. Goldwater Range. The trouble is, that explanation only ever covered the second event, never accounted for the silent formation thousands of people, including the man running the state, described 2 hours earlier. Most people remember the Phoenix lights as solved. Half of what was seen has been unexplained the entire time. Landing at number 4, the flood that came out of a clear sky. On August 12, 1997, a group of hikers entered the lower slot of Antelope Canyon under blue sky. 15 miles upstream, a thunderstorm they could not see dumped its rain into the drainage, and a wall of water and debris between 10 and 30 feet high came down the canyon like a freight train. The National Climatic Data Center recorded what happened next. 11 people drowned. Not a drop of rain fell on them where they stood. There was one survivor, the tour guide, swept miles downstream and somehow alive. 11 people, one survivor, and he was the one who knew that canyon best. Remember that phrase, one survivor, and he was the one who was supposed to see it coming. Because the last fact in this video has exactly one survivor too, and his job that day was to watch. At number 3, the river that built the West, and is running out right now. When the Bureau of Reclamation closed Glen Canyon Dam in the 1960s, the rising water drowned Glen Canyon and created Lake Powell, one of the largest reservoirs in the country. For decades, it defined the modern Southwest, its power, its water, its certainty. And then, in recent years, it fell. The reservoir dropped to levels not seen since it was first filled, exposing a pale bathtub ring hundreds of feet up the canyon walls and re-revealing side canyons that had been underwater for half a century. The Colorado River, the artery that lets tens of millions of people live in the desert at all, is delivering less than it promises, and the agencies that manage it are negotiating shortage in real time. The strangest thing happening in Arizona right now is not in a slot canyon or a crater. It is the slow reappearance of a drowned canyon that was supposed to stay buried forever. At number 2, the Pompeii nobody calls Pompeii. Here is what Hollywood never told you. Everyone knows Vesuvius. Almost no one knows that Arizona did the same thing, within human memory. Around the year 1085, the youngest volcano in that San Francisco field north of Flagstaff, the one geologists still rate a threat, tore open along a fissure miles long in a curtain of fire, built a 1,000-foot cinder cone now called Sunset Crater, and buried the homes and fields of the ancestral Puebloan people living below it under ash and cinder, forcing them off their own land. The United States Geological Survey and the National Park Service preserved the cone and the abandoned dwellings at Wupatki, 15 miles from a highway. The earth here has buried people alive before, but the worst thing this state has ever done to its own did not rise up out of the ground. It came down out of the sky as fire on the last day of June 2013, and it took 19 men who had spent their entire lives training to walk straight into exactly that, and finally, number 1, the 19 who walked toward it. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what they were. The Granite Mountain Hotshots, based out of the Prescott Fire Department, were an elite interagency crew of 20 wildland firefighters, men who hike into the worst fires in the country on purpose, who cut line by hand for 16 hours at a stretch, who had worked something like 28 of the previous 30 days that summer. Their superintendent was Eric Marsh. Their captain was Jesse Steed. They ranged from their early 20s to their 40s, and they were good, genuinely nationally respected at what they did. On June 28, 2013, lightning lit a fire on a ridge above the small town of Yarnell, in Chaparral, that, by the official account, had not burned in over 45 years. It was primed. Extreme drought, decades of dense, dry brush. For 2 days, the crew fought it. On the afternoon of June 30th, the wind reversed. A thunderstorm outflow slammed into the fire and drove it the other direction at 10 to 12 miles per hour, faster than a person can run over that terrain. The crew was in a safe spot, a burned-over area called the Black, where there was nothing left to burn. And then, for reasons no one has ever been able to fully explain, they left it. They moved down through unburned brush toward a ranch that was supposed to be a safety zone, and the fire caught them in a box canyon they could not get out of. Radio contact had been lost for roughly 30 minutes. The men who were talking to them assumed they were still in the Black. All 19 deployed their fire shelters, the last resort foil cocoons a firefighter uses when there is no escape left. All 19 died. It was the deadliest day for American firefighters since the 11th of September, 2001. One man lived. Brendan McDonough, the youngest member, had been posted that afternoon as the crew's lookout, the one whose entire job was to watch the fire and warn the others. When the fire shifted, his position became indefensible, and he was pulled out to safety. He survived because he had been sent away to watch. He has spent the years since living with that. I have read the Yarnell Hill Fire Serious Accident Investigation Report, produced by the Arizona State Forestry Division, cover to cover, and the part that haunts me is not a failure. It is the absence of one. The investigators looked for negligence, for recklessness, for a violation of policy or protocol, and they found none. Their conclusion was that the men acted reasonably, that no one was at fault. 19 people died, and the official documented answer is that nobody did anything wrong. That is somehow the heaviest finding of all, because there is no one to be angry at and nothing to fix, and it just sits there. The town of Yarnell honors them every June 30th. In 2016, the state dedicated the Granite Mountain Hotshots Memorial State Park, and you can hike the trail out to the deployment site today. It ends at 19 circles of stone, laid down where 19 men spread their shelters and made their stand, and you can walk right up to the lookout's vantage and see exactly what Brendan McDonough saw from his post that afternoon, which was everything, and not one single thing he could do about any of it.